Joshua, we've all heard the fiery rhetoric. We all understand the fundamental points that are being made by the pro-democracy movement. But realistically, do you need to get big business stakeholders in Hong Kong on board to be able to push your argument further? Are you planning to speak to groups like HSBC, which have publicly backed the security law? Do you need to get them on side to be able to make any progress in pushing back on this?
I strongly agree with your insights and how a pro-democratic camp, lots of professional sectors leader, how we can have dialogue with those business leaders or tycoons, no matter from HSBC or etc., will be really important. And I know HSBC is being threatened by the newspaper owned by communist regime, and later on, finally, they have issued a statement to support the national security legislation. It also implies how Hong Kong business company and the economic freedom is being threatened by Beijing. So I think now is the critical point to not only seeking for the support of the general public, business, and also important to have businessmen to support us. And just like how the American Chambers of Commerce have already issued a survey to claim that more than around 2/3 of the members in the AmCham criticize the implementation of the national security legislation. We know how foreign businessmen have lots of hesitation on it because it's not about political rights anymore. It's also about the political and especially economic freedom is being threatened.
Right. So have you reached out to HSBC? Have you reached out to some of these business the companies and business respondents within that AmCham survey, for example? Will you be holding dialogue going forward?
Pro-democratic camp, including me, would love to hold dialogue. And since the anti-extradition bill movement, lots of Hong Kong pro-democratic camp leaders, including me, also have the conversation and communication with business leaders. And we all know that how the political crisis must solve by political system reform. And now is the time to hold the government accountability, how to provide the solution and the package on reform instead of escalating the tension on street. We all know that street activism in Hong Kong continue for almost a year already, and the government, it seems that just hope to escalate tension. For example, now the number of arrested protesters since last summer in Hong Kong is even more than the inmates in Hong Kong's prison, which is really ironic. And even lock all the youngsters in Hong Kong to prison is not the way to solve the crisis, or that's not the solution. And who can imagine even 11-year-old primary school kid will be arrested during the protest, and that's not the way out to target the millennials even younger than me. Dialogue, communication, not only to political sector and not only to grassroots, but also to business leader is one of the way of pro-democratic camps seeking support.
Joshua, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has offered the path to citizenship to as many as 3 million Hong Kong residents. What will be the impact on Hong Kong and also your pro-democracy movement if more people rush for the exits?
Lots of Hong Kongers, even they live in Hong Kong as permanent resident, it's quite common for them hold one more passport, especially with the citizenship in Canada, in Australia, and UK, or etc. And I think it will be also a good signal for the world to realize that how Hong Kong situation is really worse, and Hong Kongers welcome Boris Johnson visa offer to 3 million Hong Kong citizens at a time when Beijing government completely ignores the views of Hong Kongers. And more important is when judicial independence and rule of law strongly eroded, and we doubt that will still exist after national security law passed. This kind of backup plan for Hong Kongers and in response to the Chinese black blocs on the national security legislation will be a good move. However, I think more important thing is I calls upon the UK government to impose necessary sanction or restrictive measure in order to push forward the withdrawal of the bill. Of course, providing assistance and backup plan for Hong Kong is good. But all we know is the best scenario and outcome will be Beijing stop the implementation of this controversial law.
On that controversial law, you have been asking the United States to step in, for President Trump to do more. Were you disappointed when the president didn't really outline any concrete measures on what to do on Hong Kong in his speech last week?
According to the White House press conference by President Trump, he already made a strong and clear announcement about how one country, two system turned to be one country, one system. Sanction, embargoes, targeted dual-use technology company, pro-Beijing red capital will all be considered. I think that's a strong signal to Beijing that how they should not ignore the voice of global community, even Beijing choose to ignore the voice of local Hong Kong citizens. I'm not disappointed, and I believe how will the White House announce that any sanction, or when will President Trump sign on executive order? It really depends on the timetable of Beijing, because right now, as you have mentioned, of course, Trump has not announced the timetable of implementation of sanction. But at the same time, Beijing has still not announced a concrete timetable on implementing the national security law in Hong Kong. So, as my understanding, or according to our source from National Security Council, White House, and from the Capitol Hill, how effective will the White House to announce or the president sign on the executive order? It will be depends on how fast will Beijing impose this law in Hong Kong. Even this law is already passed the resolution during the National People Congress, but when will it implement in Hong Kong? Or when will the agent or secret police appointed by from Beijing could arrest the people and to set up the court to take place in China instead of Hong Kong? We have no detail at all. So I think right now is the time not only for United States, but also for the world to urge China to honor its promise of autonomy under its UN-fielded joint declaration.
Joshua, if the national security law gets passed through, and if you feel that your civil liberties are being curtailed, what would you do? Would you seek asylum in a different country, or would you stay in Hong Kong?
I've no plan to live, and Hong Kong is the hometown I born, I live, and I love, and we need to stand up and fight back. A lot of expats or foreigners or journalists might ask me that, hey, Joshua, it seems that you guys still confident with the legal system or the court mechanism in Hong Kong. How come you still need to worry on the national security legislation? I would say that apart from discussing how we have no trust on the Hong Kong legal system or how rule of law in Hong Kong seems to be turned to be ruled by tear gas, I just hope to make a clear point it's not about whether we have confidence on the Hong Kong legal system, because right now we are facing the threat that the national security law will just result in setting up all the prosecution take place in Beijing, in mainland China, instead of Hong Kong, the global city, under monitor and under the involvement of global stakeholders. And that's the risk that I never imagined. I've been jailed for 3 times in Hong Kong jail, but will Joshua Wong or others dissidents need to be arrested, tortured, or prosecuted, or even locked up in the prison in China? Never say never, and that's why time is running out in Hong Kong. It's about whether we can still recognize Hong Kong as Hong Kong.